Congressman Paul, your position on the war is pretty simple. Get out. What about, though, trying to minimize the bloodbath that would certainly occur if we pull out in a hurry? What about protecting the thousands of Iraqis who have staked their lives in backing the U.S.? And would you leave troops in the region to take out any al-Qaeda camps that are developed after we leave?
The people who say there will be a bloodbath are the ones who said it would be a cakewalk, it would be a slam dunk, and that it would be paid for by oil. Why believe them? They've been wrong on everything they've said. So why not ask the people? Why not ask the people who advise not to go into the region and into the war? The war has not gone well one bit. Yes, I would leave completely. Why leave the troops in the region? It was the fact that we had troops in Saudi Arabia was one of the three reasons given for the attack on 9/11. So why leave them in the region? They don't want our troops on the Arabian Peninsula. We have no need for our national security to have troops on the Arabian Peninsula. And going into Iraq and Afghanistan and threatening Iran is the worst thing we can do for our national security. I am less safe. The American people are less safe for this. It's the policy that is wrong. Tactical movements and shifting troops around and taking in 30 more and reducing by 5, totally irrelevant. We need a new foreign policy that said we ought to mind our own business, bring our troops home, defend this country, defend our borders.
So Congressman Paul, and I'd like you to take 30 seconds to answer this. You're basically saying that we should take our marching orders from al-Qaeda. If they want us off the Arabian Peninsula, we should leave?
No. I'm saying we should take our marching orders from our Constitution. We should not go to war. We should not go to war without a declaration. We should not go to war when it's an aggressive war. This is an aggressive invasion. We've committed the invasion of this war, and it's illegal under international law. That's where I take my marching orders, not from any enemy.
Over this way.
But, you know, when you think about it, if you measured everything I've ever said, every vote I've ever taken against the Constitution, you know, I'm a strict constitutionalist. Are you suggesting the Republicans should write me off because I'm a strict constitutionalist? I'm the most conservative member here. I have voted, you know, against more spending and wasting government than anybody else. So you're suggesting that I'm not electable and the Republicans don't want me because I'm a strict fiscal conservative? Because I believe in civil liberties? Why should we not be defending civil liberties? And why should we not be talking about foreign policy that used to be the part of the Republican Party? Mr. Republican Robert Taft didn't even want us to be in NATO. And you're saying now that we have to continue to borrow money from China to finance this empire that we can't afford? Let me see if I get this right. We need to borrow $10 billion from China, and then we give it to Musharraf, who's a military dictator who overthrew an elected government, and then we go to war, we lose all these lives promoting democracy in Iraq. I mean, what's going on here? And you're saying that this isn't appealing to Republicans? Where did this come about? I think this is a Republican message. Well, the first issue that brings people to our campaign has been the foreign policy of non-intervention, minding our own business, a strong national defense. We got the most money from the active military duty people than anybody else. That's number one. And then the other subject that brings young people is following the Constitution, particularly with monetary policy. Don't print money when you need it. That's why prices go up. And all of a sudden they say a light bulb goes on and they say, yes, the Constitution, the rule of law, sound money, and a sensible foreign policy. You know, we have a foreign policy where we blow up bridges overseas, and then we tax the people to go over and rebuild the bridges overseas, and our bridges are falling down and our infrastructure is falling down. So yes, this money should be spent back here at home. We have $1 trillion foreign operation to operate our empire. That's where the money is. You can't keep borrowing from China. You can't keep printing the money. We have to cut some spending. That's what nobody here talks about. Where do you cut spending if you want to spend some money? We need lower taxes, less regulations, and we need to free up the market. We can't allow expect the government to do everything. We have to have faith and confidence that the market works, but you can't do any of that unless you look at the monetary system.
If you agree with Senator McCain's statement that the United States might need to have U.S. troops in Iraq for as long as even 100 years.
I don't even think they should have gone. So keeping them for 100 years, where's the money going to come from? You know, the country's in bankruptcy, and when I listen to this argument, I mean, I find it rather silly because they're arguing technicalities of a policy they both agree with. They agreed going in, they agreed for staying how many years, and these are technicalities. We should be debating foreign policy, whether we should have interventionism or non-interventionism, whether we should be defending this country or whether we should be the policemen of the world, whether we should be, you know, running our empire or not, and how are we going to have guns and butter? You know, the 70s were horrible because we paid for the guns and butters of the 60s. Now we're doing the same thing, and nobody even seems to care. The dollar is crashing, and you're talking about these technicalities about who said what when. I mean, in 1952, we Republicans were elected to stop the war in Korea. 1968, we were elected to stop the war in Vietnam. And tragically, we didn't stop it very fast. 30,000 more men died. So when I talk about these long-term stays, I think, how many men are you willing to let die for this? For something that has nothing to do with our national security. There were no Al-Qaeda there, had nothing to do with 9/11, and there was no threat to our national security. They never committed aggression. It's unconstitutional. It's an undeclared war. And we have these silly arguments going on about who said what when. I think it's time to debate foreign policy and why we don't follow the Constitution and only go to war with a declaration of war.
I think if you're a strict constitutionalist, we should follow Article 1, Section 8 and deal with war under those conditions. You know, think about how many problems we might be able to avoid if we don't go to war without a declaration of war. And look at the mess that we have now. And it's under the conditions of war, and it was mentioned, I think, by Richard, that under these conditions, this is when our liberties are challenged. And so it is trying to avoid those conditions when the American people become frightened. So there is a saying that goes that sometimes we ought to be more worried about what's happening here than what's happening overseas. And since I think our foreign policy has an effect on the threat of terrorism, and then you add on to it the threat from our own government. And I don't, as bad as this is, I don't put all the blame on the president, because I think Congress has tremendous responsibility, even on the war issue. We just renege our responsibility and turn it over to the executive branch, and we do not protect the prerogatives of the Congress. And that is my message constantly. Besides, I've been a member of Congress, and I think I can better be critical of the Congress, but they give up too easily. And the temptation for the executive branch over the many, many years, or probably throughout all of history, they say the executive branch is always hungry for power. So it's up to the people, and it's up to the Congress to rein in the power of the executive branch.
When we had Osama bin Laden on the run at Tora Bora, we virtually ignored him and allowed him to escape into Pakistan. Instead of pursuing him, what we ended up doing was borrowing more money and literally printing more money and giving it to Musharraf, who is the dictator of Pakistan, and say, hey, you be our guy, you go after Osama bin Laden, which he promptly did not do. And so now we're unhappy with Musharraf. We're now trying to undermine his government and put another military dictator in his place. The other thing that I would have done, I would have pursued him there at Tora Bora. I would not have gone into nation building in Afghanistan. But the other thing that I would have done, and I introduced this idea in the Congress, and that is revive the idea of the letter of marque and reprisal, which is in the Constitution. It was used in our early years to go after the pirates, targeting individuals who would do us harm but didn't belong to a particular country. So to limit the scope of the war, instead of declaring war on everybody and anybody, as we have done on the war on terrorism and going into nation buildings against countries that had nothing to do with it, we could have targeted, in a very narrow sense, those individuals who committed the crime against us. But ultimately, of course, we have to look, if we want to solve that problem, we have to look at the cause and the reasons that terrorism is such a threat to us. And quite frankly, Frankly, it has nothing to do because we're free and prosper. It has a lot to do with our intrusive and very aggressive foreign policy in the Middle East. The time is right, and there's something big going on in this country, economically speaking. The young people are waking up. People know there's something very sinister about the undermining of our liberties, and our liberties in our history over the past 100 years or so. During war times, our liberties have been undermined, but frequently they got reversed. They were atrociously violated in World War I, but a lot of it got reversed. World War II was the same way. Think of the incarceration of the Japanese. But it never goes back to normal. This time we should have a greater concern because they're more fundamental, they're more sinister, there's more secrecy in government, and we're told there is no precise enemy. The enemy is everybody, and they're all over the place, and it's going to last for a long time, it's going to last forever. And therefore, your liberties are to be undermined forever, is what they are conditioning the American people for. And therefore, I think it's much, much more serious.
Gasoline prices are high because our dollar goes down in value. Why do we have dollars going down in value? We fight these wars that are endless, and we end up printing the money for it and devaluing the dollar. At the same time, the disruption of these wars in the Middle East causes a fear factor to be put into it. A risk is involved, and the whole threat that we might invade Iran makes it so that the price of oil will continue to go up. So we're on a foolhardy course, and unfortunately, and very discouragingly, the Congress isn't doing anything but making this much worse by spending all this money that they don't have.
He wants to pull out of Iraq, end the war on drugs, and abolish the income tax. Republican presidential hopeful Ron Paul is not what you would seem to be your typical Republican candidate.
I want to ask you about some of the issues. There's one thing I wanted to get clear on here, because I've read a lot of your interviews, and I haven't really gotten myself clear on this. Your foreign policy, you want to pull out of Iraq, but not only that, you want to bring U.S. troops home from everywhere around the world. Korea, Japan, Germany. You also have said in interviews you don't think that there's any chance that Iran would ever attack Israel. What do you do as far as foreign policy?
What we want to do is not get involved in these unnecessary regions. Every civil war...
But sometimes you can't help it.
Well, you know, we can. That's my point. If we took advice of the founders and had a non-interventionist foreign policy, right now we're engaged in Pakistan. But we just invested $10 billion to buy support from Musharraf. I think it's a lousy investment.
So let me ask you this question. What is the difference between a non-interventionist policy and an isolationist policy, where some people believe...
Yes, and there is a big difference. An isolationist really wants to withdraw in the borders, and they don't want to trade with people and travel and talk to people, and they want to isolate themselves. They're sort of mercantilistic. They think they can make everything. See, this whole notion that we have to be absolutely energy independent is sort of an old-fashioned notion. That Japan is never going to be energy independent. You know, they import oil because they don't have anything. So in the modern age of economic understanding is you don't need to withdraw yourself. So the founders advise and the market advises that you travel, you engage yourself, you go through diplomacy, but you especially trade with people. For instance, we've done ourselves a great deal of harm by not talking and trading with Cuba. I mean, the Canadians trade with Cuba, but American citizens don't even have the right to go to Cuba.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who wonder how you could engage with North Korea and China and still continue to isolate Cuba.
And we talk with the Soviets, you know, and so it doesn't make any sense that we're so intimidated and so frightened that we won't even talk to the Cubans, and they're not going to attack us.
Where you have the most authority is on your commander-in-chief of the military, not commander-in-chief of the people. You're commander-in-chief of the military, and you can design foreign policy, and you could change the world within weeks about just changing attitudes, saying that we're backing our Navy off, removing the sanctions on Iran. We'll talk to you. We've talked to the Soviets. You guys aren't any more threatening to me than the Soviets were. And bring the troops home from Iraq. Give them a motivation to start talking to each other. The world would change. I'll bet oil would drop $20 a barrel. Just because right now it's up to 92 because of the threat. The higher the oil prices go, I think it's the closer we're getting to the people in the know behind the scenes on that we're getting closer to action against Iran.
But I think this country, a movement in the last 100 years, is moving toward fascism. Fascism
Today, the softer term, because people have different definitions of fascism, is corporatism, where the military-industrial complex runs the show. When they, in the name of security, pass the Patriot Act, if you don't vote for it, you know, you're not patriotic America. If you don't support the war, you don't support the troops. It's that kind of antagonism. But we have more corporatism and more abuse of our civil liberties, more loss of our privacy, national ID cards, all this stuff coming has a fascist tone to it.